Hi everyone, I'm Autumn Gregory, and my topic that I decided to look into was how did sexuality change in adolescence to adulthood? So, I chose this topic because it is important to understand the changes that undergo in adolescence involving exploration of sexuality. I think that there is an ability to change, an ability to, grow, especially from adolescence and being so so young and thinking, that you want to be one way, but we go through a lot of changes to get to where we are now. And I'm not specifically doing LGBTQ. Um, I will be focusing on it. Um, but there are some other things in there that I will be speaking about as well. So Wong in the textbook talks about um, Erickson's theory of identity versus role confusion. And I think this is where this truly comes into play because adolescents are still, trying to figure out who they are. They're still trying to, figure out who they are, like what kind of person they want to be. And then for this, I will be focusing on adolescence to adulthood. And the way that I will be doing that is I will be speaking of adolescence being anywhere between 11 to 17 because that's, what we sort of focus on when we think adolescence. And for adulthood, I will be focusing on anywhere above 18, which, this is kind of society's view of things, but I also think it lays a good foundation for me to build upon. Um, Role confusion experience when we go through adolescence and find where we feel belonging. And I definitely think that's true. We have to go through confusion in order to find ourselves and find who we are and who we will be on the other side after getting through all of this role confusion. So, how the population interacts. But I really think that this population has so much like going on, and sometimes it ends up being kind of like this. You feel outcasted sometimes, and I definitely think that comes into play when you're going through role confusion and you're starting and you might not know like who you are and what you like yet, and especially with um, sexuality. And I feel like the LGBTQ youth that have been, developing more and more as, generations go on, um, it can definitely change. And I think there's a lot of, exploration that goes on in these sorts of generations now. Um, and I thought that this photo really captured what that experience can be like. Like interactions can be, they can be like those other two girls, and it doesn't even have to be them talking about the girl, like they can just be chatting. But sometimes, and it's the same with guys too, but it can be sort of you feel outcasted because you don't know where you belong yet, and you don't know, where you want to be. You don't know. There's a lot of, you don't know. Um, Especially with ourselves and, sexual orientation and patterns and behavior. So the next thing I found was it was talked about by Truman High School, and they did a sort of like Spirit Day, I believe, where they spoke about the bullying of LGBTQ youth. And I have this because, the population is understood sort of as, there's a lot of like things that go on and I think the world is kind of getting to see like the ugly truth of things and how like LGBTQ youth are treated. Like I like how the statistics include, like, 8 out of 10 students have been verbally harassed and 4 out of 10 have been physically harassed at school. And I I really think that this shows like the true impact of how youth are going through school, and like, what's going on with youth, and how youth is, um as they go and they try and, they're trying to be themselves, but there's a lot of other factors. There's a lot of factors involving others. There's a lot of, like, it can be parents, it can be teachers, it can be any adults, it can be, it can be other students, it can be anyone having an impact on these youth. And they don't know what they want yet, and they're still trying to figure that out themselves. So by having someone, discredit them or discredit their emotions or their feelings, it might make them, less likely to be more open about themselves and how they feel. Okay, finally, how they're represented. I found this because I have seen some of these. This is how youth are represented in media. And I thought this was important to put because there hasn't been a lot of representation of LGBTQ youth specifically in media. Um, we have a lot of like popular up and coming, shows. We have a lot of um, everything, everything. Even with like bigger corporations that make films and stuff, there honestly hasn't been a lot of representation of LGBTQ youth until now. And I thought it was important to include the media because, that's what youth are looking up to. That's how they are being represented. That's how other kids who, might not have learned about LGBTQ youth yet are still getting their information and, like, grasping their idea of what it means to be an LGBTQ, youth or adult, or, and on and on and on. So I thought it was important to include the media because this is where they're getting their information from. This is how they are being represented on TV, media, whatever. So I found this for my first media resource. Um, I did find this on YouTube, and it goes into Lindsay Amer's sort of experience. And she created a sort of she has a YouTube channel. Her YouTube channel speaks on learning about the importance of LGBTQ and learning at it from a younger age. Um, she speaks on how, she's teaching kids how to express themselves and, help them learn of the other, like, the other genders, the other ways that they have of finding out who they are at an earlier age so they can grow into that and being more comfortable or explore what they like, or, but she talks about pronouns and, helps teach kids and, adolescents and even like adults, um, all about who, how to express those genders to others, how to explain those pronouns, how to, have their own identity, and, who they want to be and how they want to, like, go by or go about their pronouns, their lives, and how to represent others with those different pronouns, so that they're not, um, misgendering anyone. So she goes into that. The next one that I found was Daniela Carter and Walking in Your Truth. So she goes into her experience on being an LGBTQ youth specifically and how her life went. Um, she went through explaining like harassment and going like how hard it was to try and be herself with everyone speaking, her like all the harassment going on, and you know, her own experience with adults and others around her that could have been role models for her, but it wasn't it wasn't it didn't work out, that way. It wasn't easy. And she goes through and explaining that, and how, explaining the viewpoint to other people who, might not understand that, and explaining just how hard it is to be an LGBTQ youth. So, something I thought was really cool in the video, she stated, "It was not about who was willing to accept me, was I willing to accept myself." So, she talks about her own experience of acceptance and others, not accepting her per se, but the importance of her being able to explore and find out who exactly she was, and being able to express herself and be herself and accept herself. So she goes through the entire journey of being able to finally get to where she is and where she is now, and finally being able to express herself and be who she is. But she talks about her transformation through adolescence to adulthood, and how, gender came into play and how sexuality came into play. The first research article I found was LGBTQ youth and social media. So I did find a lack of articles focusing in the changes of LGBTQ youth and sexuality. Even when I looked up adolescent sexuality changes, there wasn't too much that I could find. But I found how, social media focuses on youth and how the youth can be themselves comfortably on social media. And I thought this was important to include because it definitely does have a say in my topic. Um, it does express, how important it is for LGBTQ youth to be able to be themselves and express themselves on social media. The article itself questions more about expressibility on social media or in public places, and how comfortable youth feels being themselves. It helps see how, LGBTQ youth have to accept themselves and have to be able to be comfortable with themselves in order to truly be able to, go through that role and get through that role confusion in order to find their identity. I think it's important because it's, it's other people being able to see them for who they are and who they want to be, and they might not have that support at home, so they might be, searching for other ways of expressing themselves in ways that they might be able to find people who truly want to accept them and help them through this role confusion as they grow from an adolescent to adulthood. And how they will go through that journey. And, those changes do go about through adolescence into adulthood. And this definitely has a say in the way that they might be able to progress through that, or, if they're going to be pushed back, or, those changes might not be able to happen because, other people telling you who you are and not accepting who you are could, you just want to be quote unquote normal. You might just want to appear normal, and I definitely think this is a big part of, sexuality change and gender change and identity change, and finding out who they want to be. The next article I found was Sexual Patterns of Youth to Emerging Adulthood. So, in this one, it focused on the patterns of sexual behavior in youth to adulthood. I couldn't find anything specifically LGBTQ, but it does talk about the patterns of the developmental phase and from adolescence to adulthood, and how the sexual behaviors are occurring. And I definitely think this has a part because it would be exploration into their own identity and who they want to be and express themselves as. And going through these and having these interactions with others definitely has a say in whether they won't know who they are until adulthood, because they haven't been able to experience some of this stuff. And who they think they are in adolescence, because they don't completely know yet. They haven't been given the room to explore. And yeah, so this does not speak for LGBTQ plus sexuality changes. The factor of the amount of partners one might have and exploring that would have a say in, the change, the developmental changes. So the interview clip I have is with someone I have known for a while and I know has been a part of the LGBTQ community for a long while in his life. He speaks specifically on his own um, town experience, and this might be different for others because of his small town and because he does have a small town with not as open-minded people. It could be a different experience for others, but his own experience is growing up in the community and on his own change and trials.
At a younger age, I was never really exposed to much about different sexualities. I had to find it all out on my own. Starting out pretty young, though, at like 7th grade, sorry, late 6th grade, early 7th grade, when my friends would teach me a bunch more stuff because they knew a lot more than I did. That started growing for me thinking, like, oh, I don't want to feel like I'm stuck to one thing, to liking one specific, like, gender or anything like that my entire life. Because I never really looked at people. I would always think, like, oh, that person looks nice, blah, blah, whatever, my entire life. And I just never realized, oh, there's an actual thing for that. But, over time, learning more things about different sexualities, different gender identities, different everything, it just shifted a lot. A good portion of my life, I had absolute hatred towards guys, and I liked girls a lot. And then that shifted again towards how I used to think as a kid, where it's like, oh, everyone's nice, I guess. But the more you learn about topics, the more your opinions on them change, and then the more open you realize the world is about things.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. So, when you were younger, you didn't have a lot of exposure to all of the, different sexualities, so it was probably harder to, learn about those and then, um, not have known about them sooner.
Yes.
Definitely.
Mm.
And so when you were still figuring everything out, what did you what did you label yourself with before you got to where you are now?
I've gone with a lot of different things. At first, when I was in middle school, I didn't have the full concept understanding of it all. I just said, I don't think I'm straight. And then I got a lot of backlash from my friends who liked to accuse me of just copying what they did.
Mm-hmm.
So at a young age, I felt like no matter what I was going to do, no one would really care. But that being said, it didn't stop me from trying to explore how I felt about myself. My freshman year came around, and I was extremely confident that I did not like guys until the end of my freshman year. And then I hated myself because I liked a guy. But all throughout my freshman year and halfway through my sophomore year, I dated a girl. It was one of the greatest times I had. We lasted a year and a half. The longest relationship I've been in. Wasn't necessarily the best, but it was one of the nicer ones. So, I mean, but a lot of the time I would date more females than I would males because at the times I would date them, I'd feel more comfortable around females.
Mm-hmm.
And then I changed how I viewed my own gender, and then that completely flipped everything, and I was very confused about a lot of things again.
So as he goes into his own experience, he did talk about how he was faced with some difficult views and how he went through school and sort of developed from adolescence to adulthood in his own identity and who he is now rather than who he was before, and how he got through that role confusion versus identity phase. And I think this is important for not only like LGBTQ youth, but like adolescents in general, and figuring out your own preferences and what you like and what you don't like, and whether you are in the LGBTQ community and whether you're not. And there's a lot of what ifs revolving around sexuality and identity development during that phase.
At a younger
Um, and then the learning points that I took away from this is that there is always challenges to be overcome when growing up and finding those changes, whether it be like you facing someone and their own opinions and views and what they view about you versus you know what how supportive people are now. There's a lot of challenges and there's always going to be a challenge, especially during those sorts of phases, especially with school, especially with parents and things like that. Things are constantly changing about ourselves, and we are always learning more about what we like and what we don't like. So we are constantly changing, and whether that be physically or whether that be mentally or emotionally or socially, there's always gonna be something changing. And during that phase, there is a lot more changing because you're going through that Erickson's, the role confusion versus identity. There's always going to be something new that is developing during that phase, and it continues on like even now. So adolescents can still have strong emotions as adults do, but can be treated worse when not independent yet and accepted. So I know there's specific struggles for LGBTQ youth sometimes when it comes to parents, and the environment they have definitely plays a part. And I think sometimes people can belittle their emotions. So I learned a lot about, adolescent emotions and how they can still feel things that are just as strong and valid as, adults. And then these are my references for everything that I used. Thank you for watching.